sometimes they start like the antibiotic that Augie's on, they don't want you to see. So I'm, putting the pill in. Yeah. Which I hate to do, then you hold their mouth and so on, so they have to.
Okay, welcome everyone this evening. I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, September 30th. It is 5:31 p.m. Deputy Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Trustee Orth?
Here.
Trustee Whitaker?
Here.
Trustee Fowler?
Here.
Trustee Gallen?
Here.
Trustee Yedis?
Here.
Trustee Elfman?
Here.
President Mendrick?
Here. Okay, first order of business, public comment. As always, if anyone has anything they would like to talk about this evening, please come to the podium and state your name. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alicia Bellar. I live on Hap Road. I'm here tonight as a representative of the Northfield Advocates Group. We introduced our effort at the July Committee of the Whole meeting, and as a reminder, our purpose is to be a reliable conduit and amplified channel for organized constructive input from village residents. In July, we launched our first community survey, and I'm here to announce we have published the results, which I will summarize quickly. We asked 3 questions. What new amenity or feature would you be most excited to see in Northfield? What would improve the Northfield downtown experience for you? What do you or your family members travel to other nearby communities to do or buy because you can't do so in Northfield? Okay, so I'll summarize. There were 80 plus responses. So they centered on several themes. First, gathering place, places for teens and kids to congregate, a cohesive shopping and dining area to visit and spend time, and connecting with community. The second one was, I'd call aesthetics, cleaning up, sprucing up, adding greenery, and creating more of a streetscape. The third being shopping, dining, and entertainment, more restaurants, more shopping, nightlife options, ice cream shop, and community pool. And the fourth is about experience. So more walkability, bike racks, benches, crosswalks and accessibility, reduced speed limit, better parking, more of it, and better situated. So this summary is posted on northfieldadvocates.org, along with the complete raw responses, all anonymous, of course. for anyone interested in reading them. And this all seems particularly relevant and timely as the board is actively re-envisioning Hap Road and Central Street. So we appreciate the time taken by over 80 residents to voice their opinions, and it's our hope that the board will review their input closely. A second survey is in development, and we'll make an announcement when it is ready to launch in a week or two.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. The next item is to approve the minutes of August 26, 2025. May I have a motion and a second, please?
Motion to approve the minutes from August 22nd.
Second. Deputy Clerk, a voice vote, please?
Trustee Orth?
Yes.
Trustee Whitaker?
Yes.
Trustee Fowler?
Yes.
Trustee Gallon?
Yes.
Trustee Yedis?
Yes.
Trustee Elfman?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, now we move into the Kathleen Morley segment of the meeting because she has the, I think, next 3 items on the agenda. So we're starting with the discussion and acceptance of the fiscal 2024-2025 annual comprehensive financial report. And then we will move on from there. So Kathleen, take it away.
Sure, this is Sebastian Dabrowski, I don't know if, Dabrowski?
Yes.
Okay, yes, from Baker Tilly. He's been working on our audit for at least 3, I don't know, more years at this point. But this is his first time presenting here, so please welcome Sebastian.
Thank you for being here. And I just remind both of you to speak directly into your microphones so that everyone in the room can hear and those at home as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Yep. Thanks, Kathleen. Hi, everyone. So my name's Sebastian Dabrowski. I'm a senior audit supervisor with Baker Tilly. I'm going to be presenting on the drafts of the fiscal year 25 audit results. Before I do, I first want to just thank everyone that we work with, Patrick, Kathleen, Mark, everybody in the finance office. It's a big ask for us to come in and have everything prepared for us on top of their day-to-day job responsibilities, and they do a great job of having everything ready for us and responding to our requests. So it's greatly appreciated for us to be able to get the audits completed. I'm going to go over the first report. It's going to be the reporting insights letter. Other than the annual comprehensive financial report, that's based on the information that's provided from the village directly to us. This report, this letter, it's a direct communication from us as the auditors to you as the governing body. It outlines the planned scope of the audit. It outlines our responsibilities of the audit, your responsibilities of the audit, manager's responsibilities of the audit. If there were any control findings over internal control walkthroughs or financial statement findings, those would be outlined in this report. So when we come out for interim field work, we do some walkthroughs over your key financial transaction cycles, your accounts payable, your payroll, your financial reporting, just to see if there's any operational risks that we might want to apply additional audit procedures to be able to provide that level of assurance over your financials. I'm happy to report we did not have any comments for fiscal year 25. The internal controls at the village are operating appropriately right now. So that letter will also explain kind of management's responsibilities in preparing the financial information that they provide to us, establishing and maintaining those internal controls, and then providing us with written representations at the end of the audit. The non-audit services that we perform is we help with the preparation of the annual comprehensive financial report, putting it all together, adjusting and conversion journal entries, and then submitting everything into a standardized form with the state comptroller into their repository of all the information. So we did not have any changes in the accounting policies. The accounting estimates and the financials were reasonable in relation to the financial statements as a whole. The financial statement disclosures were all neutral, consistent, and clear. There were no difficulties in performing the audit, no material audit adjustments. There is a schedule in the back of that letter for past immaterial adjustments. There is an adjustment on there that's the same that was in the letter last year and years prior related to the net pension liability for IMRF. So what ends up happening there is when we record that adjustment in the financials, it's based off of an actual report that's performed with the best available information at that time while IMRF is still under audit. And so they provide this actual report to all the member employers while the audit is ongoing, just to be able to have that information incorporated into all the member employers' timely, and then there's a true-up variance reconciliation once IMRF gets audited. That variance is immaterial, but it's just something that we present in the letter just for disclosure. And then also in this letter, there's going to be some resources to audit committee information, link to our website for any like trainings, webinars, things of that matter, and new accounting pronouncements that are coming down the pipeline. And then also, as we work day to day with the business office, we are ultimately engaged by you as a governing body to complete the audit. So if you have any questions, not just here today, but at any time, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. My contact information is in that letter, and Joe Lightcap's, the managing director, his contact information is in there as well. And so then turning to the annual comprehensive financial report, so that's going to give you the full financial position of the village. Starting at the front, you have a summarization with the transmittal letter and the management's discussion and analysis. So I highly encourage reading through the management's discussion and analysis. It gives you a high-level overview of what went on during the year in a narrative format with comparisons to the prior year. It's sort of kind of like the Cliff Notes version of the ACFR. And then you've got your certificate from the Government Finance Officers Association at the front of the ACFR. That was awarded for the fiscal year 24 report, and we also anticipate the village receiving that certificate of achievement for excellence in financial reporting for fiscal year 25 as well. Then you've got your basic financial statements and our opinion. Our opinion is an unmodified opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that we can provide over the village's information. It basically means anybody can pick up the report and rely on the information within as they assess the health of the village. And then after that, you've got your detailed notes to the financials that are going to give you some more specifics on what went on during the year. And then in the back, you've got long-term debt requirement information, you've got budget to actual schedules, and then you've got your statistical information at the very back that's going to give you also long-term trend data over 10 years. It's not just financial, but also includes economic and demographic information there as well. So then turning to the management discussion and analysis, I just kind of want to point out some of the financial highlights. The total net position of the village as of April 30, 2025 is $26.8 million. That was an increase for net position increased by 1.6 million or 6% during the fiscal year. And so that's split between governmental and business type. And so that total net position, that's your government-wide statement. That includes not just the activity of your governmental funds, but also includes your long-term debt activity, your capital asset activity, and your pension activity. And so there's an increase there. On your governmental funds, so the ending balances was 14.8 million. It's a nominal change from the prior year. It decreased about 92,000, but pretty consistent. And so at the end of the current fiscal year, the unassigned fund balance in the general fund was $8 million of total general fund. And so that the village's policy on the unassigned fund balance is to maintain at least 6 months of operating expenditures in reserve. And so when you look at the governmental fund income statement, what you'll see is in the general fund, you have a decrease of about 1.5 million, but that accounts for a transfer that was made over into your equipment replacement fund. So before that transfer, you actually had a surplus of the 1.3 million. Your pension trust fund, that increased for your police pension, that increased in total about 2 million. And then also on the topic of the liability, so IMRF net pension liability was pretty consistent year over year. It was 3.4 million in fiscal year 25 compared to 3.3 million in the year before. And then also on your pension net pension liability for your pension fund, it was also pretty consistent year over year. So you had about 13.9 million this year and 13.9 million in the year before. And so those liabilities, those will fluctuate based on not just contributions into the plans, but also kind of market value adjustments, how the investments are adjusting year over year. And then your net OPEB liability, which is your other post-employment benefit plan liability, that's also consistent year over year, about 1.47 million in fiscal year 25 compared to 1.48 million in the prior year. And then the last thing I want to just kind of point out in the very back, page 87 of the statistical information, you've got 10 years worth of data for your governmental fund balances. That'll also kind of include like your unassigned fund balances in the general fund over the last 10 years, so you kind of can see kind of the trend of how that's going. And so those were my prepared comments at this time, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the trustees? Oh, sorry, Patrick.
That's great. Sebastian, you mentioned GFOA and pronouncements. As you look out at the next 2-3 years, what might you see coming for us that we need to prepare for that may have a financial impact for the village?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's 3, so there's going to be one effective starting in fiscal year 2026. That'll be the first one coming up for certain risk disclosures. Then in fiscal year 27, you've got a financial reporting model improvement. And then fiscal year 2027, disclosure of certain capital assets. So we're still working on like the GASB implementation guidance on the standards. Currently, they don't appear to be material to the village at this time, so it's very unlikely that you're going to have a significant impact or change in your financial reporting. This past fiscal year, there was a GASB pronouncement for compensated absences that was actually immaterial for the village that we did not have to implement this year. Also a change in, there's a standard that was implemented this past year for GASB 100 for change in if you had any changes in your major funds to non-major fund presentations in the report, but we also were able to pass on that this year because you didn't have a change in that major fund. But these 3 upcoming GASBs, the first one's going to be effective, fiscal year 2026. As we kind of get more guidance on the implementation of those, we'll surely be passing those along. The specifics of those standards are outlined in that audit insights letter as well. That kind of give you kind of the overview of how those are going to potentially impact the village, but currently it's deemed unlikely to be a significant change.
Thank you.
Kathleen or Patrick, anything else you guys want to add before I open it back up to the trustees with any questions?
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
You know, I think-
All right, any questions from the trustees? No? Okay. May I have a motion to accept the FY25 audit as presented?
So moved. Second.
Deputy Clerk, a voice vote, please.
Trustee Orth?
Yes.
Trustee Whitaker?
Yes.
Trustee Fowler?
Yes.
Trustee Gallen? Yes. Trustee Gaddis?
Yes.
Trustee Altman?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, Sebastian, thank you so much for your help. And Kathleen, again, I'll say this over and over, but thank you and everyone on your team for getting all of this done. I know it's not easy. All right, item number 5 is discussion and acceptance of the police pension actuary report for the fiscal year ending April 30, 2025. Looks like we have some material coming our way, but Kathleen, when you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure. I'm going to introduce you to Kevin Kavanaugh. He's the principal at Lauterbach and Amon. He's been coming here for many years to go over this. Actuarially recommended contribution, also known as ARC. So just welcome to Kevin.
Thanks, Kathleen, for the introduction, and thanks for everybody for your time this evening. As you guys know, I've been here for many years, try to keep my comments pretty brief, but we will get in the weeds on a lot of different numbers, so try not to overwhelm everybody. I just passed around some copies of the presentation that we'll go through this evening, and this is going to focus on the Police Pension Fund actuarial reporting. We do 2 reports for the Police Pension Fund annually. One is the actuarial funding report, primary focus of today's conversation. We also do GASB 6768 report for police pension. And then also, as Sebastian alluded to, we do the OPEB GASB 7475 reporting as well for the village, but we won't probably talk about that too much today. Without further ado, you can pass around in the presentation that we passed around. If you turn to page 2, that's going to have the bottom line results for this year, and I'll reference those page numbers in the bottom left corner as we walk through. The key result being this year the recommended contribution from the village to the police pension fund for this upcoming year is $1,791,955, you see in the current valuation column. You'll notice year over year, it's definitely a substantial increase in that recommendation, a little over $250,000 increase, or in percentage terms, we're looking at about a 16.5% year over year increase to that recommended contribution for police. I'll get into the reasons why in just a moment on the next page, but you'll see some of the key metrics that are used to develop that recommended contribution on this page. We've got your fair value of assets. That's total assets held by the fund at April 30, 2025. Actuarial value of assets is shown below. That's where we spread out the impact of each year's investment performance over 5 years, so you get a little bit less of a volatile measurement of your assets over time. Accrued liabilities, about $44.3 million. And if we just take the difference between that accrued liability, the actuarial value of assets, we're left with the unfunded liability. It's effectively how much it would cost to get your pension fund to be 100% funded overnight. So that's about $16.3 million as of this year, April 30, 25. That translates to your funded percent this year, 63.03% on an actuarial value basis, 62.38% on a fair value. Just as a measuring stick, the average funded status of a fire and police pension fund in the state of Illinois is about 64% funded. So you guys are on that same basis, about 63. So you're pretty much right in line with state average for this year. Turning to the next slide on page 3, that's going to show you the different factors that led to the increase in the contribution. So the column on the right breaks out each different impact and its impact on the recommended contribution. So first off, starting, we saw expected changes was $50,000 increase. So that's pretty much if everything went exactly according to expectation and there was no changes, that would have been our best guess of how we would have expected this contribution to increase this year. We did observe that salary increases were greater than expected this year. The biggest change there was on the police, based on the new collective bargaining agreement, moved from 2,080 hours per year up to 2,184 hours per year. So we saw pretty substantial salary increases across the board to account for those higher hours of pensionable earnings. So that was $53,300 increase there. The actuarial experience is any demographic changes during the year. I'll drill into that in a minute, but pretty big driver. It was actually the biggest driver of the increase this year, $132,000 increase for that. Assumption changes is reflective of an assumption study that we did this year. So we do these studies every 3 to 5 years. We look at all the police pension funds and fire pension funds separately in the state of Illinois that we work with. It's over 400 of them. We compile all that data so that we can get our best estimate going forward of basically what we expect to see demographically for participants in these funds. So some key things we'd like to look at is rates of termination, disability, retirement, mortality, and pay increases. Those are kind of the 5 biggest factors that impact the actuarial reporting. We completed that study this year. The biggest takeaway was we're seeing retirement rates higher at lower ages for police officers. So basically, that's indicative of we're seeing a trend that it's more common these days that police officers, when they're at the earlier end of their retirement eligibility, they'll retire. Whereas in the past, we saw members staying on, well into their 60s, whereas that's a little bit less common these days. So updating that assumption led to an increase, that assumption change impact of $18,800 for all those assumptions together was the net $18,800 increase. Investment returns were greater than expected this year. That led to a $5,100 reduction in the contribution. And then finally, contributions less than expected. That's purely timing only. The village's contribution this past year was exactly 100% of the recommended contribution. So this is just about when those dollars hit the fund versus expectation, was a $4,500 true up there. And everything together gets us to the $254,000 year-over-year increase in that recommendation. Page 4 is going to summarize the 2 components that make up the recommended amount. First piece being employer normal cost. You can think of that as the ongoing cost of benefit accrual for any active members. That's about a fifth, roughly a fifth of the total contribution, the $333,815. And then the other piece that makes up the full recommendation is the amortization of unfunded liability. Taking that $16 million of unfunded liability that the fund has as of April 30, and we spread that out, we amortize that over 15 years. So this year's payment towards it is the $1,458,000. Together, that gets us to the $1,791,955. Slide 5 is going to detail out more specifics on the demographic changes we saw during the year. So we saw 5 new hires enter into the fund, 3 retirements, 1 disability, 3 terminations, and then no mortality experience amongst the retirees. Basically, everyone continued to collect benefits. You can see the impacts on that page of each of those items. Page 6 will show you for your active members, their age as well as their service. And then towards the bottom right, you'll notice we've got a bordered off section. It's kind of shaped like a boot. That's going to represent Tier 1 retirement eligibility. So anyone who falls within that box is going to be retirement eligible as of April 30, 2025. So you can see there's just one individual between 60 to 64 years of age, 10 to 14 years of service, who falls within that retirement eligibility box. So of your 18 active members, one of them is retirement eligible as of April 30. And the rest, you can see where they kind of land. Looks like you're going to have a few retirement eligible individuals in the next few years. Page 7 will show you some more information on demographics for the fund. So you have your 18 total active members, 32 inactive members. So one thing I'd mention on that is, you have a lot more inactive members than active. We categorize your fund as what's considered to be a mature pension fund. It basically means that you don't have as many actives as you do inactives today. So there's more people drawing a benefit than there are paying into the fund as of now. Benefit payments last year was just over $2 million for the full year. And we'd expect our best estimate 10 years from now, all things taken into consideration, is we expect the fund would be paying out approximately $3.3 million annually in benefit payments, which represents about almost a 70% increase in benefits over the next 10 years. Page 8 is a relatively exhaustive list of all the assumptions that we updated for this year's valuation. So as you'll see a lot of the things I touched on earlier, that this all relates to that assumption study that we completed. Ultimately, every single thing you see listed on page 8, all these updates that we made, led to a total increase in the contribution of approximately $18,800 that we saw from assumption updates earlier in the presentation. So this is just a pretty exhaustive list of the things we did. One thing I'll just mention here, when it comes to individual pay increases, the update that we made there primarily was to update our assumption for inflation from 2.25% up to 2.5%. Correspondingly, we updated all members' expected pay increase by that 0.25% per year. So now we're expecting members to receive higher pay increases on a going forward basis. That leads to an increase in the contribution. And that was really actually the primary driver of the increase this year. Page 9 is the change in asset value for the fund. So you started May 1, 2024, bless you, $25.6 million. You ended April 30, 2025 with $27.6 million in the pension fund. So it was a really good investment year. I would just highlight, one thing I like to look at is to compare that employer contributions. That's the second line. That's how much the village contributed into the police pension fund during the fiscal year, ended 4/30/2025. That's $1,537,900. If you look 2 lines below that, you'll see the return on investments that the police pension fund, so this is just from investment activity, the fund returned $2,467,000. So nearly a full $1 million more. So the amounts that came in via tax levy and via municipal revenues, right? Over $1 million more money came into the pension fund just from investment activity alone. So it was a really good investment year. And it kind of goes to show you the benefit of having a pension fund, right, is that you're able to capitalize on those investment earnings over time. The total return is disclosed in that text box on the right. It was 9.31%. That's net of all administrative expenses compared to the expected rate of return of 6.75. So the fund beat expectation by about 2.5%. Great investment year. We hope they're all like that.
Kevin, I wondered if, since we now have this up on the screen,
Sure.
Just to throw a monkey wrench and everything, if you could go back to page 3, Melissa, can you pull page 3 up? Just for the benefit of the people in the audience that didn't see these numbers before, just to quickly summarize those categories again so people can see. And then Patrick, if you can comment on the change in salary increase, I'd appreciate that too. Okay, go.
Quick summary of the different things. So expected change, that's kind of what's anticipated, right? So that's taken for granted if everything went according to expectation. That's the first line item. I like to focus on the column on the right because when it comes to liability, that's a long-term cost for the police pension fund, but really the recommended contribution is how it impacts taxpayers in the more immediate future. So you see the $50,000 expected increase there. Salary increases, $53,300. I'll let Patrick elaborate on that a little bit, but the meaningful change there was moving from the 2,080 hours per year to the 2,184 for your police department. Actuarial experience is the demographic changes. So those are that more like the new hires, the retirements, the disabilities, the mortality experience that we went over in detail, 132.6. Assumption changes, that's that study that we did, we completed, we updated, mainly going to be projected individual pay increases being higher. So that was the 18,800. Investment returns greater than expected. That's because the fund got that 9.31% return versus the expected 6.75. So that was the $5,100 reduction. And then finally, contributions less than expected, timing only, not indicative of the fact that the village under-contributed to the fund in any way, shape, or form. It's just a matter of the timing of when those dollars hit the fund. So that's that 4,500. And together gets us to it's obviously a substantial increase for this year of $250,000.
Great. Okay, Patrick.
Sure. Before I dive into detail on that, the timing only, when would the village have needed to have those dollars in the fund to not take this hit?
It's a good question. It comes down to, it's basically mid-year. So if those dollars were in 6 months after fiscal year end, you'd be exactly according to expectation. So to the extent that some dollars are before, some dollars are after, that's when you see a little bit of the true up for timing.
So a little time to the timing of the property tax receipts.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. So what I wanted to touch on is the salary increase is greater than expected, because when you hear that title, it makes you think that our police officers are getting such a great raise more than what the actuaries have projected over time. In this case, this is directly related to our adjustment going from 8.5-hour shifts to 12-hour shifts. The normal hours worked for a full-time basis are generally 2080 in a year. That's the number we use for averaging. Our officers went to a 12-hour shift, and they agreed to take that on a no overtime basis. So they're actually generally working 84 hours a week. The extra 4 hours, some departments take them as what's called Kelly time, where they actually, once a month, they'll take either 4 or 8 hours off to keep right at that 2080 hours. For us, since we're short on staffing, the officers had agreed to move forward with a 12-hour shift, no Kelly hours. So our officers, in a sense, saw an increase in pay because they worked more hours. Those additional hours saved us about 80% of a person. So it's one less person we have to hire, but that also has an impact on the pension benefits that you see there in that $53,000 impact. It is a significant increase for this year. I had projected some of this coming forward because we anticipated in the budget an additional increase to the pension fund beyond the normal. And I had projected about a $71,000 increase from the typical year to adjust this. However, the delta between what we had budgeted and what we now need to put in for this fiscal year is $103,000. So later on in your board meeting today, you'll see that we wrapped in a recommended budget and adjustment to cover that 103 because it is the ARC, the actuarially recommended contribution. But as you noted, we hit that every year to make sure that we're hitting our target of being fully funded by 2040.
Okay. All right, now you can go back to whatever page you were on when I interrupted you, and then we'll take more questions when you're all done.
No problem. Just a few more comments, and then I'll wrap up. I'd go back to page 10 if you want to update the presentation there as well to follow along. So on page 10, you'll see the full summary of our risk management comments. So these are some different factors that we look at to assess the overall health of the fund. First metric, we compare your total assets today against inactive liability. Think about inactive liability as anyone who's either currently receiving a benefit or has separated service, they're not actively employed, entitled to future benefits. That's going to be inactive liability. So we indicate the fact that $27.7 million in assets, $34.5 million in inactive liability. So it's almost a $7 million shortfall. What it means is that as new money comes into the fund, really that money is going to effectively be earmarked towards covering that inactive liability. So those members that are going to be due benefits in the short term are going to be drawing on some of the new cash coming into the fund via really the three sources of cash inflow are investment earnings, hopefully it's positive, employee contributions, and then the village's contributions on an annual basis. The second metric we like to look at here is the ratio of benefit payments to the fair value of assets. So what this tells us is just we say, okay, of the total pension fund, of all the dollars you've got in your pension fund today, how much of that money is being used to pay benefit payments last year? And so for your fund this past year, it was 7.3%. So you're basically taking 7.3% of the money in the fund. That goes out the door to pay benefit payments on an annual basis. We'd like to compare that against your expected rate of return on investments, because that's what you're expected to take in on an annual basis on investments, right? So in a perfect world, your benefit payment ratio would be below your expected rate of return, because then what that would tell us, if that was the case, is you'd pay your benefits for the year, but you'd be expected to earn equal to or greater than that amount in investment earnings for the year. So essentially, that would pay your bills for the year just through investment earnings alone. And then any new money that comes in from the village and the members would be allocated towards benefit accrual to pay out future retirement benefits. So perfect world, that ratio would be a little bit lower. 7.3% is what we consider to be in a moderate risk category. We'll continue to monitor that one. It did go up a little bit year over year, just some increases in benefit payments over the last year. So we'll watch that one. It moved up from 6.5% to about 7.3% this past year. I'd expect the village has a really strong trend of funding the recommended contribution to this fund. So I expect that you will see a little bit of volatility here and there, movement on this number, but the long-term trend should be downward. So you're kind of moving in the right direction on that metric.
Okay.
And then at the bottom, there's a little sensitivity on expected rate of return. You're at 6.75% expected rate of return. I think that's a pretty reasonable spot to be at. For reference, IPOPIF, so that's the Consolidated Police Pension Board that holds the assets for investment purposes for the police pension fund. They assume a 6.8% expected rate of return. So we're using 6.75, pretty much right in line, right? 0.05% different. Page 11 is going to show you the alternative contribution. So the difference here, when we talk about the alternative contribution, is that it's not the recommended amount. It's not LNA's recommended contribution. It's instead, what if we calculated the contribution per Illinois state statute for minimum funding policy? So right now in the state of Illinois, that statute says that every year the village needs to contribute at least enough to get the fund to be 90% funded by the year 2040. So effectively, you see that disclosed in the text box on the right, that's 90% funding over the next 15 years. So if we do the contribution calculation that way, we instead come up with a $1,396,011. So the reason why we do this, it's not, a village like you guys where you're contributing the recommended contribution, we don't recommend contributing on this basis, but it does just give you a sense of what's the minimum versus what you're doing. And the key here is that the recommended contribution is almost $400,000 higher, and the village has pretty consistently in the past funded at that recommended contribution level. So just to kind of show that you're really doing your part to fund what's recommended, not what the bare minimum is. And the main difference between that recommendation and the minimum is the recommendation targets 100% funding instead of 90, so that's a much more sound funding policy. And also the recommendations based on entry age normal liability versus the statutory minimums based on projected unit credit liability. So with that projected unit credit method, it really backloads a lot of the cost into the future for the fund versus the entry age normal. It's a much more stable cost measure for you guys. And then just wrapping up, these last two slides that I've got to go over are from the GASB 6768 report. They end up in the audit, so if you dig through every page of the audit, you'll find an exhibit pretty similar to what you see on page 12 in there. And what this is showing you is a 5-year history of how much the village has contributed to the fund, so that's the employer contribution. And then we compare that against the actuarially determined contribution, or AKA the ARC. That's the recommended contribution, trued up for timing. We do use a 1-year look back on that number. So you can see this year, for example, the village's contribution was exactly to the dollar, that recommended contribution. And that's been the trend over the last 5 years, with the exception of 4/30/2023, where the village put some extra money into the fund over and above the recommended contribution. So on average, over the last 5 years, the village puts in about 104% of the recommended contribution into the fund each year, which is obviously a very strong contribution from the village, and that really represents the village doing everything within your power to do right by the fund and to fund this pension fund appropriately and soundly. And then just finally wrapping up page 13, this is what we call the solvency test. It's an 80-year projection of cash flows to the pension fund. The solid black line represents that projected asset value of the fund, with the blue line representing benefit payments. The key here is the black line stays above the blue line. So basically that means that you're always going to have more in assets than the fund's expected to have to pay out in any given year in benefit payments. So that means we call that fund is projected fully solvent, or able to pay all future benefit payments for the current members. That's the ideal result. It's the best case scenario when it comes to that GASB reporting. If that wasn't the case, then you'd have to report a higher net pension liability on your balance sheet. So then when you're going over your audit, you'd say, oh, the pension liability went way up if you had projected insolvency, but you don't. So that keeps the pension fund liability at a minimum for the village. That's a summary of all I've got for this year's actuarial valuation results. Happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
I just wanted to make one quick comment and just say, I know all of us who have sat in these seats for a while are proud of page 12, that we continue to fund this at 100% year over year. So we all look forward to continuing that trend as long as things stay the way they are in the village and we're successful with those investments and whatnot. So again, I just wanted to point that out. Now, anybody questions, Todd?
Kevin, just as it relates to Tier 2 pensioners.
Yeah.
I have heard from the executive director that the state is looking at adjusting that and trying to make up for that. Where does that stand in Springfield? And that will have an additional impact to us. So this is the minimum today, but what was it, 10 years ago? Maybe it was longer than that, the Tier 2.
About 14.
And
Yeah.
they now want to come back, claw back for those Tier 2 pensioners. So
Yeah.
it's going to be an ongoing issue for the village, and I think, not for us, we'll be long gone off the board, but within 10 years, that $1.5 million payment's more likely going to be $3 million a year.
Yeah, Kevin, before you answer, I'll just hop in and say that at the meeting I attended with Julie Morrison and all the surrounding village presidents, she did ask us for our input on that. And because she can't see any better in her crystal ball than I'm imagining you're going to say, Kevin, but she has also heard that it's continuing to pop up as something that may come up in a future session. And Patrick, we've actually asked to get a better picture of that number so that we can share that with Senator Morrison as well.
And I think we have those results. I just got them a day or two ago, and you may know the number off the top of your head.
I don't have the number off the top of my head. I really wish I jotted that down. Oh, Kathleen's got it.
Okay.
So the key result here, so let's back up a step. Tier 2. So for those who may or may not know, what is Tier 2? Tier 2 is any officer hired after January 1, 2011. If their first day of service with the police pension fund was after January 1, 2011, they're Tier 2. One's Tier 2, always Tier 2. One's Tier 1, always Tier 1. So that's the way that benefits are structured. Tier 2 benefits are less rich than Tier 1 benefits. This is like any pension system in the world. That's the way they structure it. Those benefits are always just diminishing over time as they phase in these different tiers. So as it stands right now, there's some key differences between Tier 1 and Tier 2 that make those benefits less rich. There's a lot of discussion at the state level, to your point, about improving Tier 2 benefits. They actually just made some recent changes specific to Chicago about improving Tier 2 benefits. There was a ton of legislation introduced this past year about improvements to Tier 2 benefits. You name it, it was in there. Anything you could think of, it was in one of the bills that was proposed. As it stands right now and we stand here today, there seems to be one bill that's like the front runner, that there's been a lot of kind of movement behind. It's Senate Bill 1937. And there's a lot of analysis going into this bill right now. And the idea is some very specific, nuanced changes to Tier 2 benefit structure. I won't get into the crazy detail. It's very, very specific in terms of like age eligibilities and different things and deferred retirement option plans and all these different things. But some of the key items in there is that you'd see improvements just across the board to the calculation of Tier 2 benefits. It would be calculated, they'd have higher benefits. They'd have higher cost of living increases are incorporated into that bill. One of the things that in Tier 1 is an incredibly rich component of their benefit is that any Tier 1 retiree, it gets a guaranteed 3% cost of living increase in their benefit every year, no matter what. Under Tier 2, that's not the case. Under current Tier 2, they get the lesser of 3% and 1/2 of CPIU per year. One of the proposed changes that they're saying in the bill is get rid of the 1/2, so it would be the lesser of 3% and full CPIU. That would be based on simple interest, not compound. That makes a big difference when you start projecting out benefits over 20, 30 years. Compound interest it crushes the fund, really. It makes these benefit payments really inflate pretty exorbitantly in the long run. So that's kind of some of the high level stuff. Another super important component of Senate Bill 1937 that's included would be a reduction to statutory minimum funding. So right now we talked about 90% by 2040, that's state statute to incorporate, to fund benefits at the minimum level. With these improvements to Tier 2 comes increased cost. In order to combat the increased cost, the legislation includes a component that says we're going to extend statutory minimum funding guideline from 90% by 2040 to the current statute in there, not statute, but proposed legislation, is to be 90% funded by 2055. So that's a very aggressive 15-year extension of paying off your unfunded liability for minimum purposes. What I would kind of explain is when it comes to Lauterbach and Amon and our recommended contribution, and the presentations we'll continue to do in the future, I would not recommend adopting that change to funding policy. It's not actuarially sound. That's 30 years, right? So from 2025 to 2055, that's a 30-year payoff of unfunded liability. Generally, any time period over 20 years when you're paying off that unfunded liability, you're actually going to be paying less than interest on your unfunded liability. So what that means is you would theoretically, for those municipalities out there that have to or do or decide to fund at those minimum levels, if they change and they conform to that new legislation, they fund 90% by 2055, it pretty much means guaranteed for the next 10 years, they could make that contribution, and guess what? Next year, they're going to have more unfunded liability than they had the year prior. And that'll happen for a decade. That obviously, when you think about that in the long run and the impact that has to taxpayers, it's not good. When we think about improving benefits and reducing funding, not great for the long-term plan, but that's kind of the way the bill's structured as it stands right now. So the village reached out to us and kind of inquired about some options of some analysis we can perform. We can do some pretty crazy stuff, some pretty robust analysis. We did like kind of the light version, if you will, for this year to get just a general sense of what kind of a cost impact are we talking about. So the simplest way for us to do this analysis is because of all these nuanced details with this proposed Tier 2 increases, the bottom line is the absolute most aggressive change from a legislative perspective is that, and it's been talked about, is eradication of Tier 2, meaning that everyone who's currently receiving benefits under the Tier 2 structure would receive benefits then going forward under Tier 1. So that's like, guess the worst case scenario, if you will. So that's the analysis we ran to get a sense of how that would impact your fund. So to summarize, you guys have 9 Tier 1 active members, 9 Tier 2 active members. So it's about half of your active member population is Tier 1 and half is Tier 2. So you definitely have some significant risk exposure. When we looked at the impact that these changes would have, and thank you, Kathleen, for having it printed out. I should have had that myself, my bad. We looked at unfunded liability. So this is the year one. So we did this analysis in a 1 year. It's not a projected. Basically, if you think about it, that year one impact, it sets the new norm, right? So then you're going to see continued increases off of that. The impact, if we reverted all Tier 2 members to Tier 1, so worst case scenario, most aggressive version of potentially what that legislation could land on, it was an increase to unfunded liability in the current year of about $640,000. The increase impact on the recommended contribution, it was about $162,000. So like what I talked about, our recommended contribution for this year is that $1,791,955 we went over in my presentation. If instead we ran it where everyone was entitled to Tier 1 benefits, this year's recommended would be almost $2 million. So it'd be about $1,954,014. So that's the impact. So we're talking about a 9%. So this would be on top of, we already saw a substantial increase of $250,000 to this year's recommended contribution, which translates in percentage terms to that almost 16.5, almost 17% increase. If this bill, if the most aggressive version of that legislation went through, where everyone gets tier 1, you would then be looking at an additional 9%, and that's just this year. That means that next year, when we talk about the expected change, it'd be based on this year's results, right? So then you'd go up typically about 3 to 4% per year in a good year, where everything's according to plan. So it's pretty aggressive. A 9% increase to the contribution in 1 year is a big hit for the village. And then to couple that with potentially the increase you already saw this year, it's a pretty significant consideration. So thanks for bringing that up. Everything's pending right now, right? Nothing's gone through, but it definitely seems like there's a very powerful initiative at the state level to do some sort of improvement to tier 2 benefits. And this gives you a sense of kind of the upper end of that threshold. Yeah.
Okay, on that note, are there any other questions from the trustees?
Question, and I think I probably asked you this last year, but what percentage of towns and villages do the recommended versus the minimum contribution?
Oh, that's a good one. I think there's a little bit of sampling bias for me anecdotally, because I think a lot of municipalities and pension boards that go out of their way to hire a private actuary like Lauterbach and Amen, they're taking that recommendation, they're going with it, they're using it. So I would say probably, we represent approximately 400 pension funds across the state. I would say amongst our client base, certainly the majority, I would say contribute on a recommended basis. I think it probably maybe 2/3. I'm just kind of giving a general figure. And then I think a lot of the communities that don't, it's because they can't. It's because they know that might be the right thing to do, but they just don't have the revenue sources or streams available to contribute at the recommended level. When you think about the village's assets and financial investments, honestly, getting your money into the pension fund is one of the best uses of village dollars, because the money in here, it's expected to earn, like we talked about on that expected rate of return on investments is 6.75%, right? I'd be hard pressed to think that there's too many other village accounts that you have with an expected return at 6.75% on an annual basis. So getting those dollars in here, the trade-off is like, once it's in, there's no real mechanism to get it out, but it is probably one of the higher performing investments that the village can make, so.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, Kevin, thank you. Kathleen, again, thank you. The last piece of business on this item is a motion and a second to adopt the FY25 audit as presented.
Motion to accept the audit as presented.
Second?
If I could amend it,
Sorry.
to accept the actuary report.
The actuary report.
Thank you.
Sir.
Second.
Deputy Clerk, go ahead, please.
Trustee Orth?
Yes.
Trustee Whitaker?
Yes.
Trustee Fowler?
Yes.
Trustee Gallon?
Yes.
Trustee Gaddis?
Yes.
Trustee Alpin?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, the next item of business is a continued discussion regarding the credit card processing fees. As many of you will remember, we've had this conversation once. We asked staff to come back to us with a little bit more information sharing where these processing fees and the outlay to the village are actually coming from, which we have done. And Kathleen, do you want to walk us through this, please?
Sure. You were specifically looking for more information on our annual $60,761 in fees and how it broke down. And the majority of it actually is for utility billing, 79%. Vehicle licensing is 4%, and then 17% is from the building department, like escrows, permits, et cetera. And then we also looked at, excuse me, neighboring communities and what they're doing. And right now, we are the only ones in terms of Glencoe, Glenview, Northbrook, Northfield, Wilmette, and Winnetka that are pushing through those fees to community development. Winnetka has for anything greater than 10%, they've got 2% fee on community development. And for Wilmette, there's a $2 flat fee for online credit card payments or citations. Everybody else right now is eating it and not passing it through.
And I'll just remind everybody that we agreed to pass these on for the building department and that was the only one? Am I missing one? That was the only one, right?
Generally, for permit fees and escrow payments are the
Correct.
only areas where this is getting passed through.
Yeah. So there's no particular action item we're asking for. We just came back with this information because this was what we had asked the staff to consider. So if anyone has any comments, any additions, we'll just share this information and move on.
The one question I have, if I'm reading this right, we use the Visa utility interchange, or we use, Visa's our provider on the credit card. Do we bid that out at all to other card processors, or?
We switched over, we had a couple different ones. We had I think PayPal for community development. We had another one for the front desk. And then, so we had, previous to our conversion to BSNA, we had 3 different providers, just because as things happen, we added a new one on. When we switched to BSNA, they had offered a product that integrated with everything. So that made a lot more sense when we looked at it. And so it's one system, one product, it's all integrated. So that's what we currently have. And the rates were, in terms of utility billing, they were very competitive with that. They were able to give us a rate that was lower than what they had originally proposed. We had talked to them about, hey, we get a utility rate. They weren't quite familiar with that, but then they actually did end up giving us that utility rate.
So if we don't do anything tonight, then it will just be leaving the processing fees for the escrow and the permits, is that correct?
That's correct. We sensed a pretty clear consensus from the group last time of that was the only change, but you wanted to see more data. So we're not pushing any change this evening.
Just as a question though, Kathleen, do we have ACH available on our website as well, outside of credit card?
Oh, you like a bank draft? Yes, yes.
So
we
it's
do.
on there?
Yes. And that would be, yes. I don't know if it's, would be, I think, the second page. Yes, where it has the second page, those fees.
Yeah.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on that topic? All right. We wanted to move on to just an overview of the visioning session we had a couple of weeks ago. For those of you, just as an update, we called the board together to spend some time reviewing the Vision Plan 2040. We are a quarter of the way through those years that we were planning for. It was a 20-year plan, and we're 5 years in. So at Patrick's suggestion, we took some time to go back over the vision plan and cover some very specific areas of the village related to our business districts. We talked about the, excuse me, let me find my page here. All right. We talked about the overall vision plan for the central business district. We reviewed the frontage road corridor. We reviewed the Northfield Road corridor. We reviewed the East Willow Road corridor. And we talked, all that also folded into the recent changes we've made to the central business district, or I'm sorry, the Central Avenue corridor north of Willow Road. And I think what sort of the overarching view for me is that there was concurrence of this board that we are moving in the right direction, that we feel good about this 2040 vision plan that was done some time ago, and that we want staff to continue to move forward in all of these areas. I don't believe, I'm going to ask you guys for your thoughts here in a minute, I don't believe that there was anything that any of us felt was inconsistent with what's in this current plan. So from there, I'll ask Patrick, because he was doing the presentation, if you had any other thoughts you wanted to add, and then I'll just ask my fellow trustees if they had any thoughts or comments.
Thank you. No, it was a great overview for us, for staff. It's super helpful as we have people approach us with ideas to know that there's a general consensus of the board that the Vision Plan 2040 fairly represents what our goals are, and they haven't changed much. So thank you for that time. It was very helpful for us, and we'll continue to moving things forward. We plan on coming to you in a future committee of the whole meeting with a list of things that we plan to work toward to implement based on the plan's items, and try to prioritize those and see where you'd like us to focus our efforts moving forward. So thank you.
Okay. So now that you've had, a few days to sleep on it, does anybody have anything they want to add to our discussions of the other night, or anything else that you specifically want to call out here? Otherwise, we'll keep moving along. Okay. Great. All right. The next item is the discussion of the fund balance policy. Patrick, I'd ask you to introduce this item for us, please.
Sure. Thank you. As you may recall, periodically, I think it's a good idea for us to go through our policies, review them, make sure the board's comfortable with them as they stand. The policies as written, most of them don't have a date on them that show us when it was last reviewed by the board. So as we're doing these updates, we're going to put revised dates so we know, and go on a 3-4 year cycle of getting these reviewed. The next up is one that Kathleen's been working on for us for our fund balance policy. This policy needs some sentence structure help overall. Is probably the best way for me to say it, but what I wanted to do is check with the board about your feelings about a couple of recommended changes. And the biggest of them is looking at the target for the general fund balance. So the general fund is our day-to-day operating fund where most of the financial activity occurs. That's, some people will call it a rainy day fund or a savings fund. It's liquid, dollars that are liquid that we can use if a situation pops up where we need to cover things. A significant storm moves through town, it takes a bunch of trees out. We need to hire contractual support that was unbudgeted to clear trees. We have fund balance to help cover that gap. We get a surprise that our pension funding is $103,000 more than we expected. Fund balance can help cover, and so on and so on. So what this really does is help us be liquid and weather some of these unexpected changes. The biggest one coming for us right now is that the county hasn't put out property tax bills yet. So a number of towns are going, well, wait, we need and expected this revenue. Towns who didn't have the fund balance that we do to be able to ride that storm. So your current policy says at least 6 months of funds should be set aside, unrestricted, for savings. So roughly that's 50% if you were to take it to a percentage basis. I've done the research, and a number of towns, especially towns that are rated AAA in their bonding, use a range. And that range generally falls between 55 and 70%. The reason I recommend a range is because if we set a flat number and said our fund balance should be 50%, and you're over that, next year when the auditor comes in and gives you the report, and if you have 52% fund balance, the auditor's going to say, shame on you, you're violating your own policy. Well, wait, we have more money than we are required to have by policy. Isn't that good? No, your policy says 50. So I put a range in there to give you the option to have funds set aside, and when you have a project coming in the future, like a water main replacement project, you can start to accrue fund balance without exceeding your internal limit of capacity, spend that down, and really not impact your limit. So the recommendation that I'm moving forward is taking the 50%, if you will, 6 months of funding, and convert that to a range of 55 to 70%. So increasing the bottom just a little bit, but giving you some room at the top. We would layer that in with, if at the end of the year we're exceeding our targets, or the board wants to make extra contributions, we generally have 3 things we look at. The police pension funding policy says any overages or surpluses, we should look at whether or not that should be put into the police pension fund, as you heard this evening. We have the same from IMRF, and then we have transfers to our capital fund or a water fund. So each year, when we end up the year and we're making adjustments, I come to you and say, look, we're looking at a surplus, we think we should transfer funds. For example, last year, you had a significant transfer to the capital improvement fund that on paper shows you negative, and you had a slight reduction in general fund balance, but your overall funding stayed relatively the same. So the first decision point for the board is, are you comfortable with this change in methodology of going from at least 6 months, which it is currently, to a range of 55 to 70 or some other range if you prefer different numbers?
I think this is a good recommendation. It gives us a savings plan too, hopefully.
I agree.
Yeah?
Just a question. I think going to a percentage over the months is fine. I have no problem with that. What are your thoughts on having like a target within the target range, right? Like, so we've got a 15% window here. 70% is kind of high potentially. What are your thoughts on, like I said, I don't know how best to phrase it, but like a target within the target?
If there's an area within that range you'd like us to target, we can probably find some language to say it is the goal of the village to generally be within the first third of the range. However, for specific reasons, the board may decide to go higher. If you're trying to set a target within the range, so to speak.
I just want to point out that when the auditor was here, he mentioned that it's at 60%, or I don't know, or if it was on page 13, Roman numeral 13. So as of April 30th, we're at 60%.
Matt, I understand it, what you're saying. I think, Patrick's solution, if you will only confuse future boards. Like, why did they make that decision? I think it muddies things up. I appreciate where you're coming from, and I think it leaves the board a little bit of latitude for potentially the rainy day fund, for the pension plan, et cetera. That's just how I view it, and I'd rather keep it a little more simplified so that you don't put a village manager under it, finance director, and/or other trustees in the future. That's just my thought.
Yeah.
Well, I think from year to year, the operating expenses, and that's what you're basically basing this 55 to 70% on, can change dramatically with one bad thing happening. So I think that's what we've always talked about, that this fund is kind of an emergency fund and it supplements other things. Like, we've got some extra money, we can put it towards the police pension funding. But there's some people that think, because right now, aren't we roughly about $8.14 million? Isn't that the amount that we're at for kind of a surplus that you talked about?
I think it's 6.4, but I can pull that up pretty quickly.
I mean, I thought earlier when we spoke today, you said it was 8.14. $8.3 is the general fund balance. So it's right in that range. So I think, I understand with what you're talking about, Matt, but I think, what you're also talking about is that flexibility and not having to be so precise that it makes it difficult to operate. And I'm comfortable with this range.
And each year when we put the budget together, I'll do the work to make a projection and say, if we do this, we are anticipating the end of year fund balance to be about this range. And that is a good time for the board to say, you know what, we're getting to this area where we think we should be able to do different things.
Right.
Would it be possible to just have like alternative language to look at if you're rephrasing some of this, just to see what sort of a target within a target might look like from a phraseology standpoint?
If the board wants, there's some generally rewriting of this policy I'd like to do.
Right.
So if that's the will of the board, we can give you language to consider.
And in doing the rewriting, it has to come back to us, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So it'd be like an alternate to choose between.
I'm pleased with what we have in front of us.
Okay.
Patrick, one question that I had, and I'm all for being prudent with our funding, but is there a reason to move from 50 to 55% as our minimum? Just sort of having 50 as the, how it is now, sort of the baseline?
You could definitely set 50 to 70 as a target if you wanted as a board. I just moved it up based on the research I'd done of what other AAA-rated communities generally target. It's been a few years since I've done that research, but it's totally what you're comfortable with.
I would recommend that we do everything we can to stay in the AAA rating segment. So 5%, if that's enough to get us over the hump, I think 55 is a good number. Does anybody feel strongly about reviewing target within a target, or we're just going to move on from that and let you bring back the revisions to the board for approval?
I do have one question, not related to target within a target. It says the minimum may be transferred to capital fund. What's, just being newer to all of this, moving from this fund to the capital fund, what's the advantage of doing that versus just leaving it there? And let's say we get to like,
No,
get to
that's-
like a 72% number.
It's a good question. Generally, since the general fund is your operating fund, the capital fund is set aside for expenses that you expect to be either one-time and/or assets that you're purchasing. So you may decide to transfer funds out to stay within your range, but generally when you do that, I would give you a reason of why you'd be transferring that out, like the West Frontage Road water main project, or we'd be buying a new fire engine in a couple of years, so we need to have these funds set aside for that.
So it's just really just building that account out as well. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Any more questions on that topic?
So I've just got two more things
Yeah,
that
I'm
if
sorry.
you.
I
Oh,
thought
it's,
you had.
nope.
Go ahead.
I've just got a couple more things that I'd like to see for the policy, if you're comfortable with in concept. So the other is the water sewer fund. Right now, under your policy, you have no minimum for the water sewer fund. I understand why it has been done that way, because generally the water sewer fund, if you don't have a big expenditure for a project, why worry about your minimums? However, in the water sewer fund, we also charge, if you will, employee time. So each year you have personnel-related expenses in that water sewer fund. Because of that, I'd recommend we pick a target for that fund. It won't be 55 to 70%, but I'd like to come up with a target for that fund that we generally try to avoid dropping below. So if something does happen, there's a catastrophic event in the village, and we're not able to sell water, you're not getting the expense from Winnetka to purchase the water, and you're not billing residents because of whatever happened, but we still have personnel-related expenses that you're encountering. So I'd like to set a target that's related to 50% of the personnel-related expenses for a year, something similar to that. Is that a concept you're interested in seeing come back, or are you comfortable with things the way they are?
Yeah, yes. See a lot of head nods, so yes.
Okay. And the last thing is debt service. Your debt service policy basically says set aside as many funds as you need to make your debt service payment. So you're essentially setting aside twice what you need, because you're getting the property tax revenue and you're setting aside another payment. So I'm going to recommend, or I am recommending, that we look at adjusting that debt service fund balance to be 40 to 60% of the next principal and interest payment. So basically, instead of having 100% of what you need, have 50% of what you need, because the property tax revenue generally is not going to be more than 6 months behind.
Okay.
I'm seeing nods there on that.
Any
Okay.
questions? All right.
So we're going to review other fund balance policies, try to restructure this a little bit, get the writing a little bit more Northfield-ish, and bring that back to you.
All right. We have a couple of minutes, so if there's anything else anybody wants to chat about, or anybody from the public wants to talk about anything in particular, otherwise we will adjourn. And, yes, Alicia, come on up.
There's a question about this emergency fund that you're talking about. What's the history over the last 10 years? How often have you?
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Over the last 10 years, to what degree have you had to dip into this emergency fund? What's been the extent? Like, you're trying to be at a certain percent, but what does history tell you that you need? That's my question.
Sure. For most communities, it is, it really depends more on timing of revenues. Like, for example, this year, we'll be pulling into the general fund balance for the police pension that you just heard, that extra amount, as well as the timing of revenues from the Cook County. So we'll be drawing upon that. I can't tell you what's been happening in the past 10 years here, but community-wise, the drawdown of the general fund balance is less of an issue than it is how the bond rating agencies look at our creditworthiness. And to be what they call AAA rated, which is the most favorable rating you can get, they recommend at least 6 months of fund balance reserves, plus strong police pension fund assets, plus there's a number of things that the groups go through when you go through a full rating analysis. That fund balance history is something they look very closely at because they're trying to guarantee for anybody that would be lending us money to do a project that the funds are secure, that the people are going to get their money back no matter what. It's a credit worthiness.
Can anybody of you old timers think of a time where we took a big chunk of money out for it? Would it?
I think the term emergency that is what kind of throws a wrench.
Do you have your?
Yes. It's what kind of throws a wrench into, and when I say a wrench, like, that makes you think more about, like, was there a disaster or catastrophic emergency that we had?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember. I mean, 20 years or 30 years ago, there was a significant main line feeder to the village from Winnetka, water. I mean, that was hundreds of thousands of dollars that were unexpected. But as far as like the term a true emergency, I don't,
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I didn't.
But it's an insurance policy, knock on wood, right?
Yeah.
During COVID, we actually, that was a time when the fund balance went down because we weren't getting revenue during that time period. So that was a very beneficial period to have it on something completely unexpected. Now, it reversed itself materially because people bought a ton of cars, and all of a sudden, we ended up with extra revenue that we didn't anticipate. But there was a 6 to 8 month period that was quite concerning.
To add to that, Todd, yes, we did that in COVID, and then we received funds from the federal government
Yep.
to pay back a lot of those fees. So we bounced right back to our
Right.
regular reserve.
Also on page 87 of the audit report, it'll show you the history from 2016 to 2025, and you can see a dip in 2017 to 2018 of about 300,000, and from 20 to 21 about 200-some thousand, and then again from 24 to 25 because we did that large transfer over to capital.
Okay, any other questions from anyone? All right, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn the COW.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, we'll see everybody back here at 7 p.m. Thank you.